A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in the Shaman National Forest in northern Wisconsin. After our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a larger group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was kind of our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the Up, but never to this area. We're not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature. But this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike to a remote section of the North County Trail. The North County Trail is a national scenic trail like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpacking shelter, spend the night, and then hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, then we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forest. I drove slowly along gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be, quote-unquote, the hillbilly type, as they had a rusted-out pickup truck complete with a Confederate flag bumper sticker. As we drove past, I waved. They just stared back without returning any greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they continued to stare at us before we rounded a bend. I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them still watching us through the haze of the road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we didn't think anything else of that encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on those remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some much-needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way and marveled at the lushness of this forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a smaller clearing that was about 100 foot behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter's fire ring. I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around some wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back into our tent. We settled into our tent, looked through the pictures that we took that day, but after lugging a heavy backpack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was definitely ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but that night there were no RVs or other campers to make noise. So I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me into sleep. My girlfriend, on the other hand, was very uneasy that night. She normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted off to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insect noise in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent, listening to that noise again. That old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent that we were using had no windows. We could only guess what was making that noise outside of our tent. Initially, we thought it had to be an animal that got our food and a garbage bag, which we'd left in the shelter. But this noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like something rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard that persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared, we didn't know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight and against the wishes of my girlfriend. That knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making that noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit. To our relief, the voices did not seem to get any louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or just decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and that backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. At the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping at that wood. I looked down at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and a garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing over my shoulder, gazing out into the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial esker that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting closer and closer to our vehicle, quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to that trailhead in near record time. But something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to it. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared on the windshield and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade, hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning it off. We threw our gear in the trunk, and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down that gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind our car. When we got to the gas station in the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper and tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took Hook in the woods of northern Wisconsin.
I'm an icon, man. I'm a girl about a 10. I should fuck her in the Benz.